I grew up in pro-life, and because I don't normally talk this way, because I'm not always speaking to a pro-life crowd, maybe they'll edit this out and I'm going to start my actual talk. So, years ago I was the Canadian Youth Pro-Life President, a long time ago when I was very young, and I did traveling throughout Canada and speaking on abortion, mainly abortion and chastity and things like that. This is a picture of John and I with Lila Rose just last month at the March for Life in Washington. I thought I'd throw that up because some of you who know who Lila Rose is, I don't know if any of you know who Lila Rose is, there we are with her. And so I just thought I should introduce John to some important people when I was in Washington, so we can start with my PowerPoint. So the point of it is that I've had a lifetime of work for being involved with protecting human life. And some of you here might feel a call. You should follow that call, because the world needs you, and life isn't easy doing this work, but it's important and it makes a difference in the world. We can start my PowerPoint. I know it's such a great picture, but anyway. Yeah, I know, but he's got to put it up there. So perfect, here we go. So I'm first going to explain to you some differences and some important things, because I'm talking about euthanasia, and in Canada we have euthanasia and assisted suicide, and they're proposing assisted suicide here in the UK, even though they are basically two birds of a feather, meaning they're almost identical, but they're different. So euthanasia and assisted suicide only differ not by the types of drugs that are used or the types of poison that are used. It doesn't differ by the intention. The intention is to kill you. The difference is with euthanasia, the doctor or nurse practitioner or somebody is directly involved with killing you, so it's a homicide. So they're actually killing you, right? It's done by lethal injection, or they hook you up in an IV, or assisted suicide, which is using those same types of poison drugs, but they give it to you and you have to take it yourself. So in the U.S. you have 10 states. You've got 10 states that have legalized assisted suicide, and you can see the difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide in the sense of how it's done, not so as to say with the intention, etc. I think it's important because I do have to admit that assisted suicide is something that you get less of than euthanasia. It's harder to have somebody go ahead and take that lethal poison to kill themselves, with the help of somebody obviously, than to have someone actually come and inject you, right? If you just think of the whole concept of it, if any place where they've legalized euthanasia and assisted suicide, such as the Netherlands, Belgium, Canada, the numbers are much higher. It's just the whole concept of it. Nonetheless, killing is killing. So I should say right off the bat, as I've used this word killing, I oppose killing people. I'm fundamentally opposed to ever being involved with killing someone or actually doing the act. And that's why I come to this. A lot of people want to hide their language. They want to couch it in other language. They want to say, oh, we don't need assisted suicide because there's alternatives. Of course there's alternatives to assisted suicide. You can properly care for people. You don't need assisted suicide. But I'm not opposed to euthanasia and assisted suicide because there's alternatives. I'm opposed to it because it's about killing people. And I'm just opposed to that. I suggested earlier you need a t-shirt that says I'm opposed to killing people, because I think that covers it completely. So we're going to go into some issues and some facts and everything. This is my Canadian talk. So euthanasia was legalized in Canada in June of 2016. How we did it is we created an exception in our criminal code to homicide. So last night, the talk about abortion mentioned that abortion remains in your criminal code here in the UK, but there's an exception to it. So it is still possible, even though it would be very remote, that someone could get in trouble with the law for doing an abortion. In Canada, they created an exception to the criminal code. So when someone says this is murder or homicide, and they say, no, it's aid in dying, really, legally speaking, yeah, it's murder. That's what it is. People don't want to call it that. They want to say it's something else. And obviously, there's circumstances that mitigate things. The law gave physicians and nurse practitioners a right in law to kill you, to cause your death. And it did so in a very complete manner, because they have total legal anonymity to be involved with killing you in Canada. And the law says it has all these prescriptions that they must, first approve, even though it's not defined. There's really nothing defined in the law, which is really problematic. Can you imagine having the right to kill someone, but they didn't define the law? oh, I guess, but then the law, and when you look at it all, it says the doctor or nurse practitioner only have to be of the opinion you fit the criteria of the law. So when I go into some of these stories in the future, you'd say, how did they ever approve that? How could that have happened? Well, you can't prosecute them. It's not possible because the doctor or nurse practitioner who did the killing were of the opinion you fit the criteria of the law. That's how crazy it is. And if you're talking about, oh, well, in the UK, we're not going that far, all the laws, pretty much every law in the US, assisted suicide law, I'll give you a quick insight because I'm not going to be covering the US. Almost all of their laws were what I call bait and switch laws. So what they did is they passed a law that was defined and looked quite tight, even though the definitions are never clear. But I mean, it looked quite tight because they were trying to get something politically passed. Because it's harder to pass an assisted suicide law in Parliament than it is to later expand it once it's passed. And they know that, so they try and come up with something. So you see with your own bill here in the UK, they were talking about originally having a judge approve it. Oh, it's going to be safe. There's going to be a judge approving it. How can you have any problems? How could there be any problems when a judge has to approve it? And of course, even before it's gone to a final vote, they're removing that, and now they're going to give you a death panel instead. Think about it, a death panel. You're going to have people who are pro-death sitting on a death panel considering whether or not you should die. You know, it's not really a safeguard in any way, shape, or form if you think about it. And nonetheless, the whole idea of having a judge approve it was their, how would you say, their way of saying, oh, this is going to be completely safe, you know, we'll make sure that it's not abused. And of course, that moves even before it's legalized. But in the US, almost every state had a bait and switch law where they passed it and they said, oh, it's really tight. We have the tightest legislation in the world. And then a few years later, they amend the legislation because, of course, that was a hindrance. The law expanded in Canada in March in 2021. What we did is we removed the terminal illness requirement. They're already talking about that in the UK. You can't have a terminal illness requirement. That would be terrible. What about people who are suffering and who are not dying? That would be terrible, right? We also removed the 10-day waiting period, and we permitted euthanasia for mental illness alone. So you wouldn't have to have another condition. Now that mental illness alone issue has been going on in the politics of Canada, and it's now been delayed until March of 2027. Because what happened is in March 2021, when they passed that, they said, well, we're not ready for that yet, so we're going to put a 2-year moratorium on it. And now they've just kept on expanding that moratorium because they know politically it's not popular. So I'm just going to make it very clear. Yes, euthanasia is popular in Canada. They have run constant stories in Canada about people going through difficult health conditions, and they've got people in fear. So when Canadians are in fear, or people in the UK are in fear, they're in fear of a bad death, they're being convinced that at least this gives them the out of the possibility of a bad death. Well, the fact of it is that fear is not a real fear, if you look at the data. Nonetheless, that fear is causing this support. But the concept of euthanasia for mental illness alone is not popular. The concept of euthanasia for children is not popular. That's the other thing we're talking about in Canada. Bill C-7 passed in March 2021. Now here you have a picture of 2 people with disabilities saying, why us? So when you remove the terminal illness requirement from the law, you're essentially now saying, we're going to allow this for people with disabilities, because who is the only group of people who would be considered for being killed who are not dying? Well, obviously people with disabilities. And the law was defined in such a way that you had to have an irremediable medical condition, which was undefined. Well, there might be people in this room who have an irremediable medical condition. I sort of think that technically all of us do, because we're all going to die someday. But I mean, the fact of it is that, this is where we've gone. And so now you see these cases of people with disabilities who are clearly dying by euthanasia because they are going through difficult social conditions. So what they did with the law is they said, okay, if you are terminally ill, now remember, what does it mean to be terminally ill in Canada? You don't have to actually be terminally ill because there's no waiting period. The definition is you'd have to have a terminal condition. There's lots of terminal conditions, my friends. I hate to say that. That doesn't mean you're actually dying. You might have a terminal condition, so you would be approved. So if you have a terminal condition, you could have a same-day death. You could show up at the doctor on your bad day. The doctor would say, yes, of course, we have your medical record. It shows that, yes, you have this, and they could approve you. It takes 2 signatures, but that doesn't take long because they all have their friend who's willing to sign off. So you get your 2 signatures done. You could technically have a same-day death. I'm not saying that happens every day, but I am saying it does happen. Or if you're not dying, you're clearly not dying, you have a chronic condition such as you might have multiple sclerosis, you might have you might have a type of a disability, you'd have to have a 90-day waiting period. So they say, well, we'll wait for 90 days to kill you. So you do hear these cases in Canada, people who've contacted me who are part of the 90-day waiting period, and they're talking about it. But nonetheless, they're talking about killing someone who's not dying. So in 2023, Health Canada reported there was 15,343. Now that's just a number. Remember, every death is a tragedy. And when we look at the stats, it's all statistics, right? That's how they look at it. But nonetheless, we're talking about 4.7% of all deaths. Now, this is significant if you consider the time frame. We legalized in 2016, and this was in the end of 2023. We were at 4.7% of all deaths. So that's very fast, very significant change. Quebec has the highest euthanasia rate in the world. I got the recent 2024 data. It's about 7.6% of all deaths, so that's the highest in the world. Quebec's a little bit crazier than the rest of Canada. We're all a little bit crazy in Canada. It depends on where you go for that level of craziness. Nonetheless, that's massive if you start thinking about it. That gets huge. That means natural death is becoming the secondary form of death. It's starting to get that way, that it's becoming normalized so much that everyone is soon going to be considering euthanasia as the primary source of death. And I predicted that, I've been looking at the 2024 data that I've received, and I predicted we had about 16,500 in 2024 based on Ontario, Alberta, and Quebec, which represent well over half the population. So I'll give you some of the stories. Just, now this man did not die by euthanasia, but he was approved for euthanasia. He was a man who lives in St. Catharines, Ontario. So he was in a housing unit that was a subsidized housing unit. Now, if you consider what a person with a disability gets as a government payment, a government support, it's impossible for anybody on a disability in almost any city in Ontario to be able to afford even rent. Because the payment for a person with a disability is around $1,300 a month. Now, my son Peter, who's autistic, receives $1,300 a month. If he were not living with his brother, I don't know where he would live. He doesn't want to live with us because we live in a small town. And he says, Dad, there's nothing you can do in Glencoe. Yeah, it's called Glencoe. They're Scottish people who settled there, so it's called Glencoe. And he says, there's nothing there. He's right, there is nothing there. There is a Tim Hortons coffee place, but that's about it. And if you know anything about Canada, Tim Hortons is our second pastime. There's hockey, and then there's Tim Hortons. But anyway, and Tim Horton was a hockey player. But anyway, so he lives in the mighty metropolis of London, Ontario, with his brother. But I mean, the fact of it is here you have a guy who had a subsidized housing unit, and the building was sold, and a new owner took it over and said, Amir, you're going to have to move out because we're going to fix the building, and you're going to have to find another place to live. And of course, there was nowhere he could afford to live. Now, you have to understand how this works. Subsidized housing units, there's a long waiting list to get on a subsidized housing unit list. So if you lose your place that you're living, you go back to the bottom of the list. So then you have to wait to come back on the list. So it's not like, he moved, so he carries his subsidy with him. It doesn't work that way. So he got approved for euthanasia. He had severe back issues. That's why he's disabled. A GoFundMe campaign was set up for him, and they raised it about $60,000 for him. So he now is happy to be alive. So he wasn't saying, I want to die. He was just saying, with my type of disability, I can't be homeless. So he's not a pro-life guy. He's not opposed to euthanasia. What he's saying is, I don't want to die, but I can't live on the streets. I just can't do that. It's not going to work out for me. But he is alive and fine today and received help. This story, actually, I think I moved my slides around. This story all comes with the issue of veterans. Now, in the UK, you've got a bigger sort of veteran population than we have in Canada. Canada is not very much of a militaristic country. We've got I know your military is not like it used to be either, but our military is tiny, okay? It's very tiny. Donald Trump's always on our back over it because, he would say that Canada has complete protection because they're our neighbors, and I guess he's correct. So the fact of it is though that you have these people who served in our military who've come back from Afghanistan or somewhere like that with PTSD and other mental health issues. And so you had a guy contact the Veterans Affairs looking for help with his PTSD issues, traumatic stress disorder. And he was told, well, have you considered euthanasia? And you would think that's ridiculous. Well, this guy was very upset about it. He went to the media, and it sort of blew up politically. And Trudeau even tried to do a big cover-up. Trudeau always likes to do a cover-up. Anyway, so what happened is they said, oh, no, that this was just one bad case. Well, then what happened is that by saying it was just one bad case, other cases hit the media also. So that's the other thing, the importance of the story. If the first guy who was willing to go to the media had not gone to the media, we would not have heard anything about the issues of Veterans Affairs and euthanasia. So we learned that at least 2 people had died by euthanasia who were veterans, who had contacted Veterans Affairs. And the issue seemed to be simmering a bit until Christine Gauthier came out. So what happened is that Christine served in our military. She became disabled while serving in our military. So she's contacting Veterans Affairs for help with a wheelchair ramp. That doesn't sound unreasonable. She served your country. She has become disabled because she served in your country. She needs a wheelchair ramp. And they told her, "Madam, if you're so desperate, we can give you a medical assistance in dying now." Now, you have to know the further story. Christine is a bit of the type who was constantly contacting them and calling them because, you know, it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease, right? So therefore, she was onto them constantly because she couldn't understand why she was being turned down for her wheelchair ramp. And her other argument was correct. She was saying, you know, as she's gotten older, it's harder to go up the stairs sitting on your bum one step at a time. It just gets so much harder to do it than when you're young. So she needed that wheelchair ramp. The interesting thing about her, she was also a decorated Paralympian. So after she came back from her military service, she got involved in Paralympics. But anyway, that story really hit the media in a big way. Recently, she got her wheelchair ramp. A typical government, a normal job which should have costed, you know, X amount of dollars, about triples in cost because it became a government job. Because they thought, well, we better give her that wheelchair ramp. This story is, you know, blowing up on our face. But nonetheless, that's sort of what happened. Nice dog, you know. Catherine Mentler. Well, this case actually is hitting in the courts. Is in the courts now. So what happened is Catherine is a woman who has had a lot of mental health issues, and so she, you see in June of 2023, she was experiencing deep depression, suicidal ideation, and she knew that she needed help. So she went to the Vancouver General Hospital for she wanted to be admitted because she wanted to be protected from her own suicidal ideation, and they said, you know, Catherine, there's no beds for you here. So it shows you right off the bat, there's no beds, we have a lack of care for people with mental health issues. There's no beds for you here. And then they said, well, by the way, we can't schedule you to see a psychiatrist until November. Now this was June of 2023, so you start counting the months and you realize the problem with mental health care in at least Vancouver, if not most of Canada. And so they're saying this, and then they say, but by the way, have you considered medical aid in dying? So think about this. Someone who's going to a hospital because they're experiencing suicidal ideation, they're trying to make sure that they receive protection from themselves, and they're asked, have you considered medical aid in dying? So what's happened is the disability community have a court case challenging our law, and she is part of it. This is a bit of insanity, especially since we don't have euthanasia for mental illness alone in Canada, and yet they were talking to her about it. Now remember, it was legal, but it's not yet permitted. That's a whole weird situation. Anyway, I'll say something else to you because I'm here in Scotland. No, I'm not in Scotland. I'm in the UK right now. It's just I hear all these Scottish voices, so I don't know what's going on around here. Was there an invasion? I don't know. Anyway, if she were to be killed by euthanasia, could there be any way to actually prosecute? Think about this. It's been legalized, euthanasia for mental illness alone. There's just a moratorium on it. And our law has no real clear definition anyway. So you have to start thinking about what actually is going on in Canada further. Okay? Alison DeCluso was diagnosed with abdominal cancer. She was offered euthanasia. She lives in Victoria, BC. She was told that with her type of abdominal cancer, that in British Columbia they don't have any treatment for her. Now you have to understand, in British Columbia, especially in that region around Victoria, BC, which is actually a beautiful place to go. It's a beautiful place. The trees are all happy because people are hugging them all the time. It's a really beautiful place. It actually really is one of the most beautiful cities in Canada, Victoria, BC. And anyway, that's where she's from, that area. And so they told her to, if she could have euthanasia, but She declined. She wasn't interested in dying. And they said, well, then prepare your funeral, talk to your family, get ready, because we can't provide you any treatment. She went to the U.S. for treatment. She ended up getting cancer care at Mercy Medical Center in Baltimore, and she went into remission. So the case actually hit the media. Once again, the importance of the story. The case hit the media because she is suing the British Columbia government for the cost of her cancer treatment. She's saying, you would not provide it for me in British Columbia. Remember, we have universal health care in Canada. You might have to die to get it, but I mean, we have universal health care in Canada. So she said, well, you did not provide me treatment. I got it in Baltimore. I'm in remission. You should be paying for that treatment cost. So that's why the story hit the media. But because she said they offered her euthanasia, well, then, of course, things blew up. You start getting more stories. Well, Mary Griffin of Victoria, BC, died by euthanasia on March 17, 2023. She also had cancer. She was referred to see an oncologist to be assessed for her cancer. And the oncologist, it took so long to be able to get the appointment to actually see the oncologist that the oncologist said to Mary, well, it's too bad I didn't see you earlier. You had a treatable form of cancer, but now it's progressed to the point where it doesn't really make sense for treatment. She died by euthanasia. Now, Mary Griffin's family were pro-euthanasia. The story hit the media because they were just upset that she really didn't have a choice. She had a treatable form of cancer, but if it takes so long to see the oncologist and then it spreads, well, I guess they told her she was out of luck. Dan Quayle's story was far more upsetting. Dan, they had on the media his widow always crying during all the interviews because Dan had cancer. He had a treatable form of cancer. He was told that, we're going to start your treatment. And then he was put in the waiting queue for his treatment. And he waited, and he waited, and he waited, and he waited. He died by euthanasia on December 5th, 2023. So when you see the news stories, and if you go to my articles and you find the Dan Quayle story, you can actually go to my blog and then Google Dan Quayle and then you hit the original story. You see her saying, but we didn't have the money to go to the U.S. for treatment. It wasn't an option for us. Right? That was the argument. It wasn't an option for us. So obviously speaking, you see medical treatment becomes a reason for euthanasia. Oh, did I do something wrong? It's not switching. Can you guys switch it over there? There we go. Family of Joan Rowaway. If this story weren't in the media, you would say that can't be true. That you must be pulling our leg, but it is true. So Joan had cancer. She was, you see a picture of her with her family. Joan, though, was at the point where she had a conversation with her oncologist, and the discussion was around the fact that they said, your cancer's progressed to the point there's nothing more we could do for you. And I'm not going to argue that. That could very well be the case, that there was nothing more that they could do for her. And I don't believe you should accept all medical treatment anyway. Sometimes treatment becomes so horrific at a point where, or maybe it's burdensome to the point where you'd say, I'd rather accept natural death. It's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not killing anybody. That's called natural death. It's okay. We're not opposed to natural death. We're opposed to killing people, right? Let's be very clear about it. Anyway, the point of it is that in that conversation with the oncologist, the issue of medical aid in dying came up. Joan was quite clear in her interviews afterwards that she never asked for euthanasia, but the oncologist took the conversation as a request for euthanasia. Obviously, she's terminally ill, so it wasn't hard to approve her. They don't have a problem getting a second doctor signing off because they have their friends who always sign off, so that wasn't a problem. So what happened is she's being cared for at home with her daughter and son-in-law, and Fraser Health, which is the healthcare region, calls up the family saying, we're coming to pick up Joan for her MAID death. They call it MAID, medical aid in dying, just to make you feel better about killing. So we're coming to pick her up. Now, remember Monty Python? Anyway, you guys probably don't watch that stuff because you've been told not to watch that. Anyway, think about this story with the Monty Python sort of thing. They send two people to the house to come pick her up, and the family won't let her in the house. It's not about organ donation this time, okay, guys? Anyway, you didn't see that show. Okay, that's good. Anyway, the point of it is that the family won't let her in, won't let them in. They're being told, you're denying your mother her right to die. Now think about this. She never asked for it. And so finally they send someone else over, and then that person actually asked Joan, do you want MAID? And she said no, she didn't want it. But you got to think about this. It's legal. You can see how a conversation can go maybe funny in a way. The family was quite clear that Joan was partially sedated at the time of that conversation, so maybe she had intimated something that she didn't actually mean. But the point of it is this is the kind of thing you get, as crazy as it sounds. And I don't know why it won't change. Did I do something wrong? I didn't turn it off, did I? No. There we go. So I'm going to tell you a few things, and actually I should have given you an insight to this. Yeah, okay, so, yeah, here we go. So in October 2024, so this is very recent, the Ontario government finally put out a major report. So I talk about these situations that I say, well, you know, when you look at the Dutch euthanasia data, we know that about 20 to 23% of euthanasia deaths are not reported, meaning the doctor just doesn't report them. We know that there's a certain percentage of deaths that, you know, were never really requested. And you know, we know that because they've done certain research in the Netherlands. So this is not the same type of research. But anyway, what happened is the coroner's office in Ontario. So in Ontario, when a doctor kills you, they have to send euthanasia. The doctor kills you. They have to send the report off to the Ontario coroner's office. In most provinces, it goes to the Ministry of Health. In Ontario, it goes to the coroner's office. The coroner set up a committee to examine all those deaths. And he put out a report and looked at all the deaths between 2018 and 2023. And when you read some of this stuff, you see very clearly that we had euthanasia deaths that were driven by homelessness, fear, isolation, poor people at risk of coercion. You see Canadians who are with disabilities who are needlessly dying by euthanasia. Now, when the other side says, yeah, but that's the minority, that's only the few cases. Well, I have to agree, that is the minority, but it's happening. Nonetheless, I'm not opposed to euthanasia because of these terrible things that are happening. I'm opposed to euthanasia because it's about killing people. But nonetheless, when you allow killing people, terrible things will happen, okay? Because you have to understand, some doctors, as much as we have wonderful people out there who are doctors, some doctors actually sort of like this. They get into it. They think they get themselves, they acquire a God complex. And I'm not going to go into that too much further, but you can sort of understand what I'm saying. The data from the report showed that between 2018 and 2023, there was 428 non-compliant deaths. Now let's make this very clear. There might have been many, many more. Because how does the system work? The system works that Dr. A approves your death, Dr. B signs off, or it could be a nurse practitioner. Dr. A usually is the one who kills you, and then Dr. A sends in the report. So it's a self-reporting system. So you're dead, so you're the only real witness that could say maybe this wasn't right, but you're dead. And then the doctor who killed you, he has to send in the report, or she has to send in the report. So the fact of it is that some of these reports lack certain information because, of course, we don't all self-report abuse of the law. So when you're driving down the highway because you're late for your SPUC conference, and you're going at some super speed, now, of course, if you're using your GPS, it'll tell you that there's a camera coming, so you might slow down for that one. Are you going to call the police to self-report your speeding? I don't know. Are you going to do that? No. Well, this is murder, so you're not going to self-report murder either. It also showed, the report showed that 25% of the euthanasia doctors who had done euthanasia had at least one non-compliant death. It's pretty ridiculous. I live in London, Ontario. The doctor who has had the most non-compliant deaths is from London, Ontario, and it's pretty ridiculous. The question is, how come none of them have even lost their medical license? So the most egregious death in Ontario led to that person being told by the College of Physicians of Ontario that they had to stop doing euthanasia. They didn't lose their medical license. They just had to stop doing euthanasia. That's the only penalty that's been observed for any of these things. Let me go through one of these cases really quick. I got a couple of these cases. I could go through it at the end, but this will give you the idea. Mr. A was in his 40s. He experienced suffering functional decline following 3 vaccinations for COVID. He received multiple consultations with extensive clinical testing. So he's having problems post-vaccination, even though that might have been caused by something else. I'm not going to get into all this stuff. But anyway, amongst his multiple specialists, no unifying diagnosis was confirmed. Okay, so we've got no diagnosis for this guy. Okay, he had a significant mental health history, including depression and trauma experiences. While navigating the physical symptoms, Mr. A was admitted to hospital with suicidal ideation. So you have a person who goes through suicidal ideation. I guess we should kill him, right? You know, when did killing people become a treatment for suicidal ideation? I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that one. Anyway, psychiatrists presented concerns of an adjustment disorder, depression, possible psychotic symptoms, and of course, during a second occurrence with suicidal ideation, Mr. A was involuntarily hospitalized. During the hospitalization, post-traumatic stress disorder was thought to be significantly contributing to his symptoms, PTSD. Right? He received inpatient psychiatric treatment care through a specialist team. He was also diagnosed with cluster B and C personality traits. Got a lot of things going on this guy. The Mater assessor had the opinion that most that the most reasonable diagnosis for Mr. A's clinical presentation was severe functional decline, was a post-vaccine syndrome, even though, of course, medical people don't want to accept that, in keeping with chronic fatigue syndrome, and also known as, I can't pronounce that, we need a doctor to pronounce that. But after his death, so now he's killed by euthanasia, so he's dead. No pathological findings were found at his post-mortem examination. Nothing, okay? The cause of death following post-mortem examination was provided as post-COVID-19 somatic symptom disorder with post-traumatic stress disorder and depressive disorder. Nonetheless, he's dead, okay? So here you have a coroner's report looking at this case saying they even did an autopsy. They found nothing. But of course he's dead. We killed him by euthanasia. He's gone. You can't bring him back. And of course the doctor's off scot-free. A man who was in his late 40s who was diagnosed with long-standing severe gastric and ulcers and known he had concurrently presented with multiple mental illness, namely depression, anxiety, narcissistic personality disorder, bipolar mood disorder type 2. He had chronic suicidal ideations. Once again, when did suicidal ideation become a reason for euthanasia? A year prior to his provision of MAID, Mr. B attempted suicide. He experienced polytrauma, required extensive medical and surgical management and rehabilitation. Psychiatry was involved with his MAID assessment. So you'd say, well, maybe he needed a psychiatrist for his MAID assessment. Anyway, who deemed him to be capable of participating in the MAID process, and the suicide attempt was deemed to be a reflection of profound existential suffering. A psychiatrist determined that neither the psychiatric illness nor the suicidal ideations were facilitating his request for MAID. So the psychiatrist said, well, yes, he's got suicidal ideation. Yes, he's got mental health issues. But that's not leading to his MAID request. So he's dead by euthanasia. What made that story even worse is the doctor actually gave him a ride for his death, picked him up, brought him for his death. I don't have this story up here, but Dr. Weeb, who's our most profound killer in Canada. So if you're talking about medical killers, she's done probably at least 1,000. She's got a euthanasia clinic in Vancouver. There was a guy in Ontario who was turned down 5 times by his doctors for euthanasia. The person then contacted the Dying with Dignity group, who got him in contact with Dr. Weeb in Vancouver. She did an assessment over the phone with him. She approved him. He goes and he flies to Vancouver. She picks him up at the airport. Very nice. She picked him up at the airport. Vancouver traffic's pretty bad, so that was very nice of her. She brings him to the MAID, her euthanasia clinic. She kills him. And this is all about freedom, choice, and autonomy. I'm not going to go through that. Enough of that stuff. Oh, and this one, Miss B. Now, I often talk about this case. She was in her 50s. She had multiple chemical sensitivity syndrome. So all of us have some sort of reaction to chemicals as human beings. Some of us have extreme reactions. This is a woman who had extreme reactions to certain chemicals in her environment. She had a history of psychiatric hospital care for depression, anxiety, suicidality, post-traumatic stress disorder related to childhood trauma. So you can understand how she's reacting very extremely, and she's had other issues related to this. You have to put this in perspective. Here's a woman who has extreme reactions to certain chemicals in her environment, so much so that she's on disability because she can't work because of her extreme reactions. She, therefore, is living in social housing. So you have to put this in perspective. Could you imagine living in Toronto in one of these big apartment buildings that are all for social housing? Because that's where she was living. And you have multiple chemical sensitivity issues. So what did this woman need? She needed a clean place to live, right? She needed a house, a place, which was independent, where she's not constantly reacting to all the chemicals around her. She said she couldn't leave her bedroom because the smell of people's cigarettes, pot, cleaning fluids, whatever, was so great and it affected her so greatly she could never even leave her bedroom, is what she explained. That's why she wanted to die. Miss B had difficulty securing housing that met her medical needs. Well, that's obviously the issue, right? After years of attempts to secure appropriate housing, the Human Rights Tribunal did issue and allocated funds to renovating her apartment. Now remember, she's still living in a social housing unit. It doesn't work, a social housing unit, if you have MCS. These renovations did not address her MCS symptoms. A remaining option presented was living in a small hyperallergenic space. Well, she really didn't need that. Let's be honest. She needed an independent house. A result of her housing situation conditions necessary to her. Anyway, she was approved for euthanasia. She died by euthanasia. Okay? It's insane. It's insane. We're going to go past this. Euthanasia for mental illness. Now, you would think that, Canadians must be pretty mentally ill to approve that. Now, that's not only existing in Canada, you have that in the Netherlands and Belgium, euthanasia for mental illness. And the problem with this whole concept is once you start allowing killing for suffering, because really that's what it's about. They say it's about A, B, and C, but really it's about killing people who are suffering. You have to understand that, yes, of course, the argument about not allowing euthanasia for mental illness stops making sense once it's legal. And the reason is that, of course, people with mental illness are suffering. There's no question about it. So you might have some physical issues that you're dealing with, and it's a type of a suffering. But is not psychiatric issues also an extreme type of suffering? And the answer is, well, yes. So if we can kill you for your physical symptoms, then why can't we kill you for your psychological issues? You know, the problem with all of this is once it's okay to kill, there are many human conditions that it'd be okay to kill you for. So the first thing is you can never allow the killing. Once you allow the killing, everything changes. That's the basis of it. Euthanasia for mental illness creates a question around killing someone who's got treatable conditions and the question about their ability to consent. Because remember, this is sold to us as being for competent adults who are capable of consenting and are freely choosing. Now, someone with mental illness, are they freely choosing? Are they competent to consent? You know, these are all just issues of selling it. They say, oh, well, come on, you can't stand in the way of a competent adult who wishes to die because they're suffering. And they would say, it's their body, it's their choice. This is the argument you hear. My body, my choice. I know you've never heard that argument before, right? My body. No, you never heard that one. So anyway, the point of it is, but it's not about my body, my choice. Even assisted suicide, yes, you have to do it yourself, technically. The point is, who would know the difference if you didn't do it yourself? The lethal drugs can be taken by you taking it yourself, or someone can do it to you. Anyway, the point of it is that it's not about a self-killing when someone else is directly involved with killing you. It's a lie. It's all a lie. Anyway, psychiatrist Dr. Sonia Gain, he's important because he is a past president of the Canadian Psychiatric Association. He teaches at the University of Toronto. He's pretty important in the psychiatric community. He makes it quite clear that it's impossible to predict whether the mental illness conditions are irremediable. Now, why is this important? Because in the Canadian law, it says that you must have an irremediable condition, not defined. I've already said most of us, many of us would have an irremediable condition. The fact that we're all going to die someday would mean maybe all of us do. Anyway, the Council of Canadian Academies also concluded there's no evidence of support providing made solely for mental illness, but it's legal in Canada and it will come into play in March of 2027. I know Trudeau's leaving, but who knows what's going to happen in Canada. Canadians are a little bit crazy on this stuff. Parliamentary Committee, here is the issue. We had a committee in February that came out with a report in February of 2023 looking at the issue of euthanasia for children. It also looked at the question of euthanasia by advanced request. So what do I mean by euthanasia for children? So they talk about then it would be a mature minor. We would allow euthanasia for mature minors. The committee said yes to this, okay? What is a mature minor? I think our laws might be similar in the UK and Canada. We've had a lot of court decisions around medical treatment issues. So you're determined to be a mature minor based on an assessment. So it's not based on an age. It's not like you're between the age of 12 and 18, so we're going to consider you a mature minor. No, it's based on whether the doctor assesses that you're capable of consenting to that treatment or not. These issues only come up when, of course, there's disagreement. Let's say you have a medical condition, there's disagreement between you and the doctor or you and your parents, etc., as to whether you want that treatment or not. Then the question of your capability of consenting or whether or not you're a mature minor would come into play. Anyway, the College of Physicians in Quebec presented to the committee while it was doing its hearings, and they said, yes, we support euthanasia for mature minors, but we also believe that we should have infant euthanasia in Canada. Now, they have that in the Netherlands. They have something called the Groningen Protocol in the Netherlands, which allows euthanasia of newborns. But let's think about this. I don't know, have you guys done any studying about this word called eugenics? Eugenics? Because, the eugenics is a concept that started a long time ago, and it's basically determines that there's certain lives that are not worth living. So when we're talking about euthanasia of newborns, we are really talking about eugenics. We're talking about killing a newborn with a disability because either the parents or the doctors think that that child's life is not worth living. Life unworthy of life. The Parliamentary Committee report supported that euthanasia for mature minors. The other thing about the issue of advanced consent, So what they're saying is that, we legalize euthanasia based on people who are capable of consenting. They said you have to be a competent adult who's capable of consenting and freely choosing. Well, what happens if you're not capable of consenting? So they want to have this euthanasia by advanced consent. So it means while you are capable of consenting, you would request it. You may not have a medical condition that requires, or how we say, could be approved, but if you ask for it in advance, then if you become incompetent, we can still kill you, is what they're pushing for. A recent Alberta case, 27-year-old autistic woman. Now this case got held up in the court, so this woman is still alive today. I know this case really well because I've been in regular conversation with this young woman's dad. And this case hit home to me in a major way because my son Peter, he's autistic and he's a year older than this young woman in Alberta. She's 28 now. And I really hit home because here you have a young woman who has no medical conditions, but she's autistic and she wants to die. So she's got very strong suicidal ideation. She was approved for euthanasia, and I'll give you the story a little bit more. This is the story that you can't read in the media because there's I don't know, it's being recorded. I'm just going to say to you that I can't go further. So I'll say to you that the issue is that she attempted to get euthanasia the year earlier, and she was turned down for it, and she couldn't understand why she was turned down for it. She has suicidal ideation. She's autistic. She thought she'd be approved for it. And they said, no, you have no medical condition. There's nothing wrong with you. And so they said, but if you were suffering. So then she went back and tried again about a year after that. So that was the year before, in 2023, she applied for it again. And she said, well, I'm suffering. Now, you can't prove if someone's suffering or not. If I tell you I'm suffering, I know many of you are listening to me right now are probably suffering greatly. When's he going to be done? Like, when's this over? Like, really. But the point of it is that you can't tell someone when they tell you that they're suffering that they're not suffering. How are you going to prove that? Like, talk to any physician. If someone's coming to them with all these feelings of suffering, you can't prove they're not suffering because it's your feeling that you're expressing, right? Anyway, the father of the woman prevented the euthanasia death. He took the case to court. So she was supposed to die on February 1st of 2024. That was her death date. Remember, there's a 90-day waiting period for people who are not terminally ill. So that was her death date, February 1st. Instead, he went to court, and the judge said, I cannot prevent this death, but he couldn't understand how she got approved. Why couldn't he prevent the death? Because the law was designed to kill you, and there's nothing in the law that gave any judge the right to intervene. There's nothing in the law. But the judge did say he couldn't understand the role of Alberta Health Services in this case. Now, because he said that caused a big stir, and she's still alive today. We did intervene in that case. There's the case of right now going on in British Columbia about St. Paul's Hospital. So this is the whole thing that conscience rights were mentioned last night, and there was a whole talk about conscience. So what's happening is the euthanasia lobby doesn't like the fact that Catholic hospitals don't do euthanasia. So you had the case of Sam O'Neill. She died by euthanasia in June of 2023. So she was at St. Paul's Hospital. She requested euthanasia, and they said, well, we won't do that. They did transfer her. So she was transferred out, and she did die by euthanasia. So St. Paul's Hospital said, we won't do the act, but we can't hold you here. We will transfer you out. So the court case is all based on the idea that she was denied her right to die. She was being forced, they called it a forced transfer. Now, it's a ridiculous sort of idea, because if you know anything about hospitals at all, people get transferred all the time. You go to a hospital, and that hospital says, well, you have this sort of condition. We're not specialists in this condition, so we're going to transfer you to that hospital, and they've got a specialist there in that condition, right? It happens all the time. But in this case, because it's euthanasia, well, they want to force Catholic hospitals to euthanasia. So this is where we're at right now. So euthanasia is sold to the culture as enabling personal autonomy and choice. Everything's about choice. My body, my choice. We're told that it's for people who are suffering and nearing death. They say, well, why are you bothering? Like, why are you trying to prevent someone's right to die? These people are dying anyway. Why would you bother anyway? That's what they're telling us. We're told that it's not a form of suicide. And you're hearing that in the debate right now in the UK, that this is not suicide. These people are rationally choosing. Are they rationally choosing? All these points are either philosophically wrong or usually not the case. As I say, in the case of personal autonomy and choice, clearly that's a lie. A lot of people go through suicidal ideation, but when someone else carries out the act, or when someone else is directly involved in the act. There's a total difference between someone wanting to jump off a bridge, and I'm not saying that that's a terrible thing, obviously. I'm not saying there's ever anything acceptable about suicide or good about suicide. There's never anything. It's always a tragedy. But there's this difference between someone jumping off a bridge and someone being pushed off a bridge. Right? There's a difference. We're told that it's about people suffering and nearing death. Well, obviously that's not the case. If you look at the data, actually, the majority of people who die by euthanasia are not going through what they call extreme suffering. They're not asking for euthanasia because of that. It usually has more to do with social conditions. They feel alone, they feel lonely, they feel that their life has lost meaning or purpose or value. They might have and they usually do have a significant health condition, but they feel that there's no purpose to their life continuing. A lot of them might fear future suffering, but if you look at the data even out of Canada, there's very few who are actually suffering right now. The Netherlands data is actually a little bit better than ours because I think they ask better questions there. The Dutch are just a little bit more honest. You know, the Dutch are willing to call it euthanasia. In Canada, we can't call it euthanasia because that upsets people, so we have to call it medical aid in dying. What's medical aid in dying? Like, come on, like, what is this? It's not a form, of course it's a form of suicide. Why do people ask for euthanasia? Most people die by euthanasia because they're going through a difficult health condition. They are feeling depressed, lonely, experiencing feelings of hopelessness, despair. They believe their life has lost meaning, purpose, or value. Well, there's lots of human beings who are in the situation that they feel their life lacks meaning, purpose, or value. You know, we know that. We know this is the reality. But do we kill these people? And if you look at the culture today, this is a cultural issue because why are people pushing for this today? I think the problem with today is that we've become a culture that we have stopped being oriented towards each other, and we've been sold a culture that is about me doing what I want, when I want. And you know, the funny thing about it is as much as people who are from a faith perspective or come to a pro-life conference might have a different view of life, we've been sort of imbued by the cultural reality that we live in, so it's affected our lives too. Like, we become very self-oriented even if we know philosophically I should be caring about you. It's just a reality. We're all like that. And you know, the culture needs to shift back to caring about the other. And let's be brutally honest, we're happier when we're caring about the other. You know, I have 6 kids. And what would my life be without my wife and my 6 kids? I have 4 grandkids and 2 on the way very, very, very soon. And it means I have 6 grandkids, 2 I just can't hold yet. And what would my life be without the family I have? What about my friends and the people around me? What about my community? What would my life be like if I didn't have that gift? And we have to think about that and realize what it means to be human. I think what's lost in all this talk about euthanasia, assisted suicide, and killing is the nature of the human person. That's what's lost. We've lost the concept of what it means to be human. We've lost the concept of how we interact as humans and how we're made to be human. I guess we don't want to be saying about how we're made to be human because that means we'd have to actually believe we were made. Anyway, the fact of it is that you're made to be interdependent. Right? You're made to be with others. You're made to care for others and to be cared for. That's how you're made to be. That's how you thrive. That's how you are more human. And when you decide you're not going to care for the other, or you become a situation where you're not being cared for and you're lonely, you could see how someone might have a feeling that their life lacks meaning, purpose, or value. We have a whole issue not about, they say this is about freedom. This is really about abandonment. These are deaths of despair, and we have to realize that. So like the Netherlands and Belgium, both countries have euthanasia for, in the Netherlands it's a little different than Belgium. Belgium is euthanasia for children right through. The Netherlands, you have to be 12 years old, or you could be a newborn. They don't have euthanasia yet between 1 and 12. Nonetheless, the whole debate about euthanasia for children's going on, euthanasia for psychiatric conditions, euthanasia for people who can't consent anymore. Think about this. If you allow euthanasia for people who can't consent, because that's what we're debating right now in Canada, euthanasia for people who can't consent. They might have asked for it. They asked for it 5 years ago. They said, if I were in this situation, I'd want to be dead. Now remember, when you become incompetent, you have no legal right to change your mind. Right? If you might have some competency level, like you might have, people with dementia don't lack any competency, but if you've asked for this ahead of time, you've signed it in a legal document, when the time comes, you have no right to change your mind. So now you have imposed death. You're imposing death upon people, and you're saying, oh, it was freely chosen. There's no free choice. But if you remove consent, then you have another problem going on. This is the next thing going on. Then when you go to a nursing home and you see this elderly woman in a bed who has got later term dementia, the argument's going to be made, isn't it terrible that you're not killing her? Think about where the culture goes when you allow killing. It all starts with allowing killing. That's where it starts. Because there's no end point. Because we all experience human suffering. It's a reality that we all experience. I'm not saying I want you to suffer. I'm just saying you have a human body. You have a reality of your condition. And you need each other. Anyway, the point of it is there's only one line in the sand, and that's killing. Either you're going to allow killing or not allow killing. It's the same thing with abortion. Once it's allowed, then they say, oh, well, it was only originally when they legalized it, they said, oh, it would only be for certain conditions, and that's it. Well, obviously speaking, that doesn't last very long. So with assisted suicide, what they're doing right now in the UK is they're debating assisted suicide, and they're saying, well, we're going to have a tighter law. It's not going to be like Canada. The funny thing is they were originally talking about a Canadian-type law, and then with all the stories coming out of Canada, they moved off of that pretty quick because they realized that that'd be too much to sell at the moment. It's too much to sell at the moment. And let's be brutally honest also, people don't understand the issue well because they're saying, oh, well, we're going to have assisted suicide only. We're going to have some death panel approve it and all the rest of it. It's going to be tighter. We're not going to allow all these crazy things that are going on in Canada. And yet they're already talking about removing that terminal illness requirement, etc. But what they don't want to talk about is California is talking about expanding their law because they're saying we're going to be more like California. Assisted suicide only, California's got a bill right now in their legislature to debate changing that because they're saying, well, there's problems with assisted suicide. What are the problems with assisted suicide? Well, these drugs are horrible. It's the worst thing you could ever possibly consume in your life, this poison that they give you to kill you. It burns your throat. It's absolutely caustic. They have to give you a multiple drug system in order to kill you. So they have to give you a drug to put you into a paralysis. They have to give you a paralytic. Why? Because the drug to kill you sometimes causes you to go into convulsions, and that doesn't look like a death with dignity, so we have to paralyze you. We have to put you into coma. So now it looks like a nice peaceful death because you've been paralyzed and put into coma. Okay, so now it looks really peaceful. Well, guess what? When you've been paralyzed and put into coma, you might look peaceful. Okay? And then we give you this, so that's a drug mixture they give you, and then what it does is it shuts down your lungs. So that's how the drug works. It shuts down your lungs. Obviously, when your lungs are not anymore taking air in and out, eventually your heart will stop beating, and that's how it works. But it's a horrific thing, and you see some of these little videos. I don't want you to watch them because it's actually about killing somebody. Nonetheless, they're saying, oh, this is the worst stuff in the world, And the other side knows it, so they want to change it because they know that they would rather do it by injection or by IV, which is euthanasia, because obviously that seems a bit cleaner, not so problematic. And yet in the UK, you're going to hear the politicians say, oh, it works perfect in California. There's no problem there. There's no problem in Oregon. I've got a whole other talk about Oregon and California that I'm going to be doing at the Parliament on Monday, where, of course, it's crazy what's going on there, and yet they want to say it's perfect because that's what they want. They want to say everything's fine. So there's many young people in this room. We need a long-term opposition to euthanasia. If they end up legalizing assisted suicide, I'm not saying they will. The current bill you have in the UK is losing support every time they bring another amendment. Every time it's losing support as it goes along. So it's possible in the end it might get defeated, but I guarantee you under Starmer, he's going to try again because he wants this bad. If this were to pass, you can't remain silent. You're all here because abortion became legal how many years ago? And yet we're still here today saying it's wrong to kill. And so we need to have this for a long term. Some of you might feel called to be involved in this issue of euthanasia. And if you are, I'm happy to communicate with you and help you become a champion in that. And thank you very much.
Thank you.